I'm going to begin by showing you how we get started. So I have my two finished plates here that are bisque, and I'm going to set those aside and instead pull in the two paper plates we started with. On the newsprint, you're going to start with the little one, and you're just outlining it. This is to get the shape of the plate. On the other newsprint, we'll trace the big plates. As closely as possible. Now if I actually take my big plate, you can see that it's not exactly the same size as the circle that I have. The circle is a little bit bigger. That's because the bisque has shrunk in the kiln, and that's perfectly all right. It just means that you can't put any of your design really close to the edge. Now I'm a big Harry Potter fan, so my design is going to be the logo from Harry Potter. So I'm going to do the triangle shape here. All right. Out. Alright, so I ended up altering it a little bit, but the Sharpie outline, I wanted my circle to be super circle. So the Sharpie outline is where I want to keep. So now I'm going to demo how to cut it out with the X-Acto knife. When using the X-Acto knife, you always get a cutting board first. That goes under your brown paper, newsprint. And the X-Acto knife is a blade. It is sharp. And you use it by keeping your hand flat on the table, the knife at a 45-degree angle, and slowly drawing it along your lines towards you. You don't need a lot of pressure because the X-Acto blade is sharp. So just light, even pressure. Okay, so if you are in Art 1, Art 2, this is the only shape that you need. And this is going to be our mask. A mask is something that keeps paint from getting to part of what we are adding it to. So that will be our mask for this plate. Okay, to apply the template, you need to have the template itself, your bisque plate, one that's already been fired, bottle of water, and then your glaze. And for me, I'm going to use this precious persimmon. And I am looking at the color on here for what it will look like once it comes out of the kiln. The first thing you want to do is spray your newsprint piece with water until it's wet. And then you're going to place it on your plate. And you can add I'm putting water on my brush to help piece it on. That way I'm not stressing out the paper too much. You want it to lay flat though, or as flat as possible. might notice this wants to move around a lot, so you just have to be as careful as you can with it. Once you have it in place, you want to get your glaze and make sure your glaze is all stirred up. Again, it should look like yogurt, right? And you want to stir this for about 15 seconds at the start before you start using the glaze. And then you want to stir it about every minute that you're using it. You really want to keep it well stirred. And then you're going to start on the mask and paint outwards from there. And if you remember with our glaze, we need 3 coats on here. And yeah, you're going to end up covering up your mask, and that's fine. You don't need to be able to see it. If you notice at the top here, this is already starting to dry. That's because it's soaking right into the bisque. It dries out pretty fast. More so if you don't spray a ton of water on your plate. That's really not ideal. Okay, so my first coat is done. While that dries, it's already dried over here. It's still drying all over there. While it's done, I'm just going to stir my glaze a little bit more. And I'm going to put a marker off to the side to say I've already done 1 coat of glaze. Okay. And I'm going to come back here and I'm going to start painting my second coat where it's already dry. With this coat, you need to sit and let it sit just a little bit longer. Okay, you can see my third coat of paint is done now. I want you to notice the difference between the color of the dried glaze, the color of the wet glaze, and the color it says that they'll turn out. Always trust the color it'll turn out. These have minerals in them that change color as they go through the firing process. I'm going to take my brush then and paint on the third and final coat of glaze. All right, and then I'm going to wash my brush. While the paint is still wet, you want to use something to grab a corner or edge. You can use X-Acto of your template, and you're going to carefully pull that up. Yay, it looks pretty cool. The things you'll notice is that there are a few little spaces where it's smeared out, and I'll show you how to clear those out in just a moment. All right, while your glaze is still wet, you can come in with one of these specialty tools that you can check out from me, and you can very carefully use that to scrape off some of this glaze that came outside of your stencil and you don't want to keep. If you're using the blues, dark greens, or the black, you're going to have a shadow of this color left behind. Okay, I want you to think of yourself as a dentist while you're doing this. Alright, so there I have my Harry Potter symbol plate. Now we need to paint in the actual symbol itself. I don't want to leave that blank. To do this, we are going to use our jungle gems. That's what we're going to use on the inside of our shapes. So with these, because they have a really tight screw top lid, you can shake them. I don't have examples of what these look like except for what's printed, so you'll have to look at those printed sheets. But you want to shake this for about a minute. All of the little things that will kind of pop and explode are kind of stuck to the bottom. These have been sitting for the summer. So you've really got to make sure the lid is on and shake them really well. Okay, so this one is a bit thick there, you can see. You use a nice clean brush. And you can kind of see there's some spots of stuff in it. That is what causes it to kind of explode. They do good exploding in the kiln, and it ends up having this really cool look to it. So this is when you need your patience, your craftsmanship, and a nice brush so you can paint on your, very carefully, your 3 coats of glaze. Okay, I'm done with my second coat, and now I'm going to close the lid back on the top of this glaze and shake it up again for another 10 seconds. I've been letting this dry for a couple minutes, but you definitely want to let it dry and shake up the glaze again. I've also cleaned off my brush just so I have a clean slate for my 3rd coat of paint. Alright, so that is my 3rd coat of paint done. I'm going to rinse my brush really well in a bucket of water. You can see that paint is still wet, but I've stayed really carefully in my lines so that there's not a lot of overlap. However, you can also see that there are no white spaces on here. You can't see the plain bisque anywhere through here. If there were any spots that weren't covered by paint, this would not be food safe. So we definitely want to be food safe. Again, on the back, there is nothing. There's going to be a clear coat of glaze there. So that is the little plate done. Now, if you're in sculpture and ceramics, you have a second plate to do. And to do that, you should have kept all of these little pieces that I cut out from the first plate, and also the triangle I cut them out from. So what I need to do here is get this paper wet and get all these places, all these pieces carefully placed down on the plate where they go. So I'm going to fast forward through that for you. And I'm going to start by getting the paper wet. Okay, so I cut those out, and then I'm just going to very carefully actually just brush on some water on here and try and get these to stick. This newsprint has to be really well wetted to do this, so don't be afraid to. And you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and dip it in my water and place it on, and hopefully that will, there we go, help it stick. Okay, so we have now the negative space for our image. To do negative space, I'm going to do colors opposite too, since where the shape is opposite. So to do that, I'm starting again with the Precious Persimmon. I'm going to use the big brush again and give it a good stir. And then very carefully I'm going to pull in, and I was afraid that would happen. You want to be really gentle if you have a lot of loose pieces. You can use your X-Acto to pick them up. Make sure there's no glaze on the bottom. I just wipe that off. I'm going to dunk this back in water and place it back on the plate so it lines up with where that glaze is. A tip that we'll use, I'll show you just a second. So here I have a sponge that I've cut into quarters. Please do not cut my sponges. Only use sponge quarters that are already made. And you're going to dip that in the glaze. Hold your pieces down and sponge right over them. Only do it to pieces you are holding down, okay? Because they'll want to keep moving around. Very, very gently brush on the glaze. So that is my first coat done. It is a little wonky on there. I think I probably put those a bit too low. I'm going to go ahead and start up here with my third coat. Just reloading the sponge. And a minute to dry. Alright, this is nearly completely dry, so I'm going to start on my third coat. I have squeezed out my sponge into the glaze so that I don't have very much left over in there. I'm just going to dunk that in the water and clean it out. You don't want to leave sponges with glaze sitting around. You don't want to pick up one that someone's used and end up putting the glaze of the wrong color on your plate. You'd be pretty upset. So I'm coming back to now third coat with my brush, because that way I can just throw it on there a little bit quicker. Please don't forget to clean off your brush too. You can see the paper is pretty well stuck down now. That first couple minutes of struggle was worth it to have this down. And I bet there's going to be a whole bunch of nasty parts when I pull this off. Like I said, while that's wet, we're going to peel off the paper and throw it in the trash. So the outside parts are pretty easy to take off. The inside parts, we're going to use the handy dandy tool again, the same one that we used to scrape, if you're able to see it. And I'm just going to try to catch a corner of this, or an edge of the newsprint, and pull it off. Make sure you clean up after yourselves. Okay, and I do have quite a few kind of spotty areas there. So I'm going to take my tool and go through and clean some of them up. Alright, so that's pretty cleared off. Now I'm going to make sure you close up any glazes you're done with. Paintbrushes in the water. And now I'm going to go back to my kaleidoscope, give it a good shake, and I'm going to fill in all of my negative spaces there. 3 coats. Alright, I'm on my third coat of glaze with the kaleidoscope. You can't really tell that I'm on my third coat, so don't ask me which coat you're on because I don't know, just like you can't tell. Again, I'm being really careful. You can tell I've switched to a much smaller brush, so I can very carefully get into all these edges. Again, you don't see any of the bisque through. Every part of this is covered. You can see all the lovely spots on the kaleidoscope glaze. Those are going to pop in the kiln, and they'll end up, we'll have to look at the examples to see how they end up. They end up kind of like smears and almost like fireworks of color. So they're quite cool. If you need a smaller brush, get one. Just make sure you are washing out and returning all the brushes that you use. And that one is done. My brush a rinse, close up the glaze, and then I will be putting a transparent coat on the backs. And there you have it, 2 plates that are painted, one with different colors in positive and negative space. Now you're ready to do it all over again with your big plate.